On June 24, 1944, the USS Tang cut through the Pacific waters roughly 150 miles to the southwest of Kagoshima, Japan. Down in the control room, Lieutenant Commander Richard O'Kane pressed his face close against the periscope, his eye fixed on something that sent a chill racing through his body. Before him lay 6 enormous cargo vessels, each one bristling with valuable cargo, surrounded by a protective screen of 16 escort ships. This was the biggest Japanese convoy he'd set eyes on throughout 3 separate war patrols. Through the lens, O'Kane could make out the merchant ships sitting low in the water, weighted down with troops, ammunition, supplies, and all manner of equipment that Japan desperately needed to prop up its failing Pacific defenses. Around him, his crew maintained an almost sacred silence, every man aware of what was about to unfold. For the past 4 hours, they had been pursuing this convoy, methodically working the Tang into the perfect striking position. The submarine's magazine held 24 torpedoes, each one a massive 3,000-pound instrument of destruction tipped with a warhead powerful enough to snap a ship's spine. O'Kane's mind was already churning through the calculations that would determine success or failure. Angle, speed, distance, depth. He had learned the art of submarine warfare under the legendary Commander Dudley Morton aboard the USS Wahoo, where fearless aggression combined with surgical precision had made Morton the most formidable submarine commander in the entire Pacific theater. Now, commanding his own boat, O'Kane was demonstrating that he had not merely matched his mentor, but pushed beyond him. What the Japanese Navy leadership failed to understand, despite mounting evidence reaching their intelligence offices, was the fundamental transformation that American submarine warfare had undergone. The boats themselves were superior machines. The torpedoes actually worked now, after years during which they had proven catastrophically unreliable. And commanders like O'Kane had crafted new tactics that transformed submarines from isolated hunters prowling the depths into convoy killers operating with ruthless efficiency. The equation of Japan's defeat was being solved not through surface battles and naval gunfire, but in the dark waters below, where silent predators stalked their unsuspecting prey. The Tang's story had begun 9 months earlier on a construction slip at Ma Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo, California. Her keel had been laid on January 15, 1943, during a period when America's industrial capacity was producing submarines at a rate that would have seemed like pure fantasy just 2 years before. By August 17, she had slid into the water, a Balao-class submarine stretching 311 feet 10 inches from stem to stern, displacing 1,526 tons when riding on the surface and 2,424 tons when submerged. The Balao class represented the absolute cutting edge of American submarine design. Their hulls, constructed from high-tensile steel of superior strength, could withstand the crushing pressures of the deep ocean. They could dive to 438 feet, pushing far deeper than the older submarines that had seen service in the war's earliest years. This depth advantage handed commanders like O'Kane a critical tactical edge. When Japanese destroyers released their drums of depth charges, a Balao-class boat could descend below the effective strike zone of nearly all anti-submarine weapons. The earlier fleet submarines were trapped at 300 feet, making them sitting targets for determined escort vessels. Tang herself carried 10 21-inch torpedo tubes, 6 positioned forward and 4 aft, giving her tremendous striking power. The forward battery consisted of 6 tubes arranged in 2 tiers, with 3 on top and 3 below, allowing for rapid salvo fire that could saturate a target area with multiple warheads simultaneously. The 4 aft tubes offered something unique, the ability to strike at enemy ships even while maneuvering to escape, transforming what might otherwise be a desperate retreat into a continued offensive operation. Each torpedo weighed 3,154 pounds and carried a 575-pound warhead filled with Torpex explosive, a compound significantly more powerful than TNT. The effective range extended beyond 6,000 yards, meaning targets could be engaged from distances where escorts might struggle to mount an immediate counterattack. Loaded fully, Tang carried 24 torpedoes total, allowing for multiple attack runs before she would need to return to base for resupply. Propulsion came from diesel-electric machinery. On the surface, the 4 diesel engines could drive her through the water at 20.25 knots, while simultaneously charging the massive battery banks. When submerged, powerful electric motors drew their power from those stored batteries, enabling silent running at reduced speeds for stretches lasting up to 48 hours. This dual propulsion system gave submarine commanders unprecedented tactical flexibility. They could sprint ahead of a convoy using surface speed, submerge to avoid detection, deliver an attack using silent electric power, then surface again and race away at high speed. Most significantly, Baleo-class submarines could conduct extended patrols for 75 days without refueling, giving them the range necessary to depart Pearl Harbor, venture deep into Japanese home waters, patrol for weeks, and return safely to base. A cruising range of 11,000 miles at 10 knots surface speed meant they could operate effectively anywhere across the Pacific expanse. The crew of 87 men carried provisions and supplies calculated to sustain them for 90 days, enough to keep the boat and her personnel functioning throughout extended deployments in hostile waters. This potent combination of range, destructive capability, and endurance made submarines like Tang the ideal weapon for executing Japan's maritime strangulation. On October 15, 1943, Tang was officially commissioned with Lieutenant Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane assuming command. O'Kane was 32 years old, a graduate of the Naval Academy's class of 1934, a man steeped in naval tradition and trained to excellence. He had spent the preceding year serving as executive officer aboard the USS Wahoo under Morton, witnessing firsthand 5 combat patrols during which Wahoo had sent 20 ships to the bottom. When Morton prepared to take Wahoo on her 6th patrol in October 1943, O'Kane was already occupied with the commissioning preparations for Tang. Just 4 days before Tang officially entered the fleet, Wahoo departed on that 6th patrol and was sunk with all hands somewhere in the Lapérouse Strait. The loss devastated O'Kane, but it simultaneously hardened his commitment to pursuing his mentor's aggressive combat philosophy. Where O'Kane differed from Morton was in approach and execution. Morton represented pure aggression, the kind of reckless courage that would drive straight into the teeth of a convoy without hesitation. O'Kane possessed that same boldness, but he tempered it with mathematical calculation and systematic preparation. He drilled his crew relentlessly on periscope recognition, on the precise estimation of target range, on the split-second coordination required for successful torpedo attacks. He invented new methods for conducting surface assaults during the darkness of moonless nights, understanding that Tang's low profile and dark hull paint rendered her nearly invisible against the black sky and black water. He practiced the technique of drifting silently without engine power, which allowed Tang to maintain her position while stalking convoys without generating the acoustic signature that running diesel engines would create. Every innovation, every practice session, every refinement of procedure was designed with a single goal: increase the probability of success while reducing the likelihood of being detected and attacked. By January 8, 1944, Tang had completed her shakedown period and training exercises and was ready for combat deployment. She arrived at Pearl Harbor prepared for war. The Pacific Submarine Force had finally, after years of struggle, overcome the torpedo disasters that had crippled operations since the war's beginning. Solving these defects represented one of the most crucial developments of the entire Pacific War. The Mark 14 torpedo had been plagued by 3 separate problems that, taken together, made it nearly useless in actual combat conditions. First, the depth control mechanism contained a calibration error that caused every torpedo to run approximately 10 feet deeper than the depth that commanders had set. Submarine captains aimed at a ship's waterline, expecting the weapon to pass just below, but instead their torpedoes slipped harmlessly underneath the target's hull, passing beneath the vessel's most heavily armored midsection, where a hit would cause fatal damage. Second, the contact exploder, the device supposed to trigger detonation upon striking the ship's hull, frequently failed to function upon impact. Torpedoes would strike the steel side of a ship and either bounce away without detonating or disintegrate from the force of the collision without ever exploding. Third, the magnetic influence exploder, which was intended to detonate beneath a ship's keel and break the vessel's back through the massive shockwave, either ignited prematurely or failed to trigger at all due to variations in Earth's magnetic field across different ocean regions. These three compounding defects haunted American submarine operations from December 1941 straight through September 1943. Submarine crews positioned themselves perfectly, fired spreads of torpedoes at ideal angles, watched through periscopes as the weapons struck home, and then watched in growing horror as nothing happened. The target ship would steam away unharmed while the submarine frantically dove to escape the inevitable counterattack. Patrol after patrol returned to base with reports documenting these failures, accounts filled with the frustration of crews who knew they had performed their duties flawlessly but watched their weapons betray them. The Bureau of Ordnance, the organization responsible for developing and producing torpedo systems, refused to acknowledge the problems. Officials insisted the weapons were perfect and blamed the crews for poor marksmanship and inadequate tactics. This stubborn denial persisted despite overwhelming evidence accumulating from combat reports filed by experienced commanders. Admiral Charles Lockwood, who commanded the submarine force in the Pacific, finally forced the issue by ordering systematic testing of the weapons. Submarines fired torpedoes at nets suspended at precisely measured depths, and the tests proved conclusively that the depth control settings were wrong. They fired torpedoes at vertical cliffs to test the contact exploders, demonstrating that failure rates exceeded 70%. These tests, conducted during the middle of 1943, finally compelled the Bureau of Ordnance to admit the defects and begin implementing corrections. By late 1943, the depth mechanisms had been corrected. Contact exploders were redesigned with improved reliability, and the unreliable magnetic exploders were simply deactivated in favor of contact detonation alone. For the first time since the war's beginning, American submarines possessed dependable weapons. This transformation revolutionized the entire character of submarine warfare. In 1942, submarines had achieved minimal success despite conducting hundreds upon hundreds of attacks. In 1943, with partially repaired torpedoes, sinking rates began to improve, but remained inconsistent and unpredictable. In 1944, armed with fully functional weapons, American submarines transformed into the deadliest anti-shipping force ever to operate on any ocean. Tang entered service at precisely the right historical moment, equipped with working torpedoes and commanded by an aggressive officer trained in the latest tactical developments. The combination would prove devastating in ways that Japanese naval planners could scarcely imagine. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on January 22, 1944, bound for her first combat patrol among the Caroline and Mariana Islands. The first real test came on February 17th. Tang detected and moved to intercept a convoy consisting of 2 merchant ships with a protective screen of 5 smaller escort vessels. As she closed in for the attack run, an escort vessel suddenly appeared on the horizon at 7,000 yards and bore down toward her at increasing speed. O'Kane ordered Tang to maximum depth immediately. 5 depth charges detonated nearby, the shock waves rattling the hull and reverberating through the metal frame, but fortunately causing no serious damage. When the escort eventually departed and returned to the convoy, Tang rose back to periscope depth and resumed her pursuit. At 1,500 yards range, O'Kane gave the command to fire. Tang launched 4 torpedoes in rapid succession aimed at the first freighter. 3 of the weapons found their mark, striking the Goten Maru amidships in devastating succession. The 6,800-ton ship sank stern first into the depths within minutes. 5 days later, Tang located another convoy moving through darkness. O'Kane maneuvered his boat to within 1,500 yards and fired a perfectly executed spread of torpedoes. The weapons slammed into the Fukuyama Maru, tearing the vessel apart in a series of catastrophic explosions. Tang shadowed the damaged convoy for another 2 hours, waiting for the right moment to strike again. When it came, O'Kane fired 4 more torpedoes at the Komiya Masino Maru. The ship disintegrated in a massive explosion so violent that survivors would later report the ship's cargo of ammunition had detonated in the conflagration, magnifying the damage caused by the torpedo warheads. By the conclusion of her first patrol, Tang had expended all 24 torpedoes and achieved documented hits on 16 of them. Navy records credited her with sinking 5 ships totaling approximately 18,000 tons. The service awarded her crew the Submarine Combat Insignia, a distinction granted only to submarines that sent at least one enemy vessel to the bottom. O'Kane personally received his first Navy Cross, official recognition of his tactical skill and aggressive leadership. Tang's second patrol commenced on March 16, 1944, with operations concentrated around the Palau Islands, Davao Gulf, and the approaches to Truk. She made 5 surface contacts during the patrol but had no opportunity to execute successful attacks. Instead, Tang received assignment to lifeguard duty near Truk during massive American carrier strikes against the heavily fortified Japanese naval base. This mission would prove to be just as significant as any combat patrol. On April 29, 1944, American carrier aircraft unleashed enormous raid upon Truk. Dozens of aircraft were shot down, their pilots and crews parachuting into the lagoon waters or ejecting over open ocean. Tang positioned herself near the atoll, ready to conduct rescue operations. Over the next 3 days, O'Kane and his crew pulled 22 airmen from the water, including 9 rescued by a Vought S-2U Kingfisher floatplane that had actually landed inside the Truk lagoon to recover them. That Kingfisher floatplane, now overloaded with survivors and unable to generate sufficient lift to become airborne again, created a problem. Tang surfaced nearby, took the pilots aboard her deck, and then watched as the empty floatplane was deliberately destroyed by explosives to prevent Japanese capture. The rescue operation set a new record and earned Tang's crew a Presidential Unit citation. More importantly, it demonstrated O'Kane's readiness to place his submarine and his men in danger for missions that transcended pure destruction. The 22 pilots whose lives were saved carried that gratitude back to Pearl Harbor aboard Tang. Tang returned to base on May 15th, having not fired a single torpedo during the patrol, but having accomplished one of the war's most dramatic rescue operations. The Third War Patrol would eclipse everything that had come before it, becoming the most devastating single submarine deployment ever conducted against Japanese merchant shipping during all of World War II. O'Kane requested assignment to the East China Sea and Yellow Sea, waters that positioned submarines dangerously close to Japanese-controlled territory, but offered extraordinarily rich hunting grounds for convoys transiting between Japan and the Asian mainland. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on June 8, 1944, her magazines fully loaded with 24 Mark 18 electric torpedoes. These advanced weapons operated on battery power rather than compressed air, leaving no telltale wake to betray their passage through the water. This characteristic made them nearly impossible for lookouts and spotters to track back to their source. The Yellow Sea during the summer of 1944 had become a hunting ground where American submarines operated with near impunity. Japan's merchant fleet, already savaged by 2 years of relentless submarine attacks, was being forced to concentrate remaining shipping into larger convoys protected by more escort vessels. This defensive strategy, rather than improving protection, actually made convoys more conspicuous to American submarines, equipped with modern radar and easier to track once initial contact had been established. The Japanese Navy, preoccupied with offensive operations and battleship engagements, had failed to develop coherent anti-submarine warfare doctrine. Escort vessels were few in number, equipped with obsolete detection equipment, and commanded by officers whose training emphasized surface combat rather than convoy protection. Japan's neglect of anti-submarine operations was puzzling for an island nation whose entire survival depended upon uninterrupted maritime commerce. Britain, confronting a similar submarine threat in the Atlantic, had devoted enormous resources to convoy protection, developed sophisticated defensive tactics, and constructed hundreds of specialized escort vessels. Japan had done none of these things. The Imperial Japanese Navy viewed submarines primarily as reconnaissance scouts for the battle fleet, and relegated convoy protection to defensive duties considered beneath the dignity of serious naval officers. The Navy's obsession with decisive surface battles meant that merchant shipping received minimal attention and virtually no modern equipment. This cultural bias, combined with institutional rigidity, left merchant vessels catastrophically vulnerable to submarine predation. The Grand Escort Command, Japan's belated attempt to organize systematic convoy protection, was not established until November 1943, already far too late. Even after its formation, it received mostly obsolete destroyers, crews with inadequate training, and minimal resources. Planners had requested 360 anti-submarine escort vessels, but received only 40. These vessels lacked modern sonar systems, possessed only primitive depth charge racks, and operated without air support or coordinated tactical doctrine. American submarines equipped with radar could detect convoys at night from distances of 15 miles or more. Japanese escorts, equipped with outdated acoustic listening devices, could detect submarines only at ranges below 2,000 yards, usually too late to prevent attacks from succeeding. Furthermore, Japanese anti-submarine doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattack rather than remaining with the convoy. When escorts detected a submarine, their instinct was to pursue and destroy the attacker, abandoning the merchant ships they were supposed to protect. This tactical preference left damaged convoys vulnerable to follow-up attacks by additional submarines already positioned in the vicinity. American submarine commanders learned to exploit this weakness ruthlessly. One boat would attack, drawing away the escorts through aggressive maneuvering, while other submarines in the area moved in to finish off the crippled convoy. Tang operated independently, but her tactics were predicated on the assumption that Japanese escorts would pursue her after attacks, leaving the damaged convoy exposed to continued assault. Japanese shipyard capacity simply could not replace losses at the rate American submarines were inflicting them. Japan's annual shipbuilding output was approximately 1 million tons. During 1944, American submarines were sinking more than 2 million tons annually, double the rate of replacement. The mathematics were brutally simple. Every passing month, Japan's merchant fleet contracted further, shrinking in tonnage and capacity. By mid-1944, critical raw materials, petroleum products, and foodstuffs could not reach Japanese factories and cities in sufficient quantities to sustain industrial production or feed the population. The submarine blockade was strangling Japan more effectively and more rapidly than any surface campaign could possibly achieve. On June 24th, Tang's radar made contact with a massive convoy operating southwest of Kagoshima. 6 large ships, shielded by 16 escort vessels, arrayed in protective formation. O'Kane spent 4 hours maneuvering Tang into position, using the submarine's superior surface speed to race ahead of the approaching convoy, then submerging to wait in ambush along the convoy's anticipated path. As darkness fell completely, O'Kane brought Tang to periscope depth and aligned his boat for a surface attack run. The convoy steamed directly toward him, arranged in 2 distinct columns. At 2300 hours, O'Kane issued the order to fire. Tang launched 3 torpedoes in rapid succession at the nearest ship in the lead column. She swung her bow around sharply and squeezed off 3 more torpedoes at a second target further down the line. The weapons ran hot, straight, and true. 6 massive explosions tore through the convoy. Tang descended steeply to escape the escort vessels, which scattered depth charges in erratic patterns far from where the submarine actually sat in the darkness below. When Tang crept back up to periscope depth half an hour later, O'Kane stared through the scope in stunned disbelief. He'd expected to find 2 ships going under. What he saw instead was absolute devastation. 4 vessels were either engulfed in flames, rapidly sinking, or dead and listing helplessly in the water. Only after the war, when American officers examined captured Japanese records, did the full picture emerge. Those 3 torpedoes meant for the far ship had somehow struck 3 completely different vessels. The convoy was packed so tightly together that the torpedoes running at 6 feet below the surface had carved through multiple targets like a knife through butter. Tamahoko Maru, Tainan Maru, Nasusan Maru, and Kanichi Maru, 4 ships totaling more than 16,000 tons, all fell to the bottom that terrible night. It was the single most devastating attack any American submarine would achieve during the entire war. One spread of 6 torpedoes, 4 ships destroyed. Tang had fired half a dozen weapons and eliminated 4 vessels. For Japan, the arithmetic was catastrophic. Each of these ships had demanded months of backbreaking labor to construct and carried supplies that the war effort desperately needed. That all 4 went to the bottom in mere minutes exposed the brutal reality facing Japan. shipbuilding capacity that couldn't keep pace with American submarine efficiency. Fast forward 6 days, and Tang was hunting again. On June 30th, a cargo ship named Nikin Maru appeared on the horizon, steaming alone without any escort protection on the route running from Kyushu to Daejeon. Okin brought Tang to the surface and gave chase immediately, firing 2 torpedoes that both went whistling past. The Nikin Maru's captain, understanding his vessel was under attack, began throwing the helm hard over repeatedly while frantically signaling for air support. Tang slipped beneath the waves to evade depth charges from a circling aircraft, then surfaced as darkness fell and resumed the relentless pursuit. For 6 hours, Tang hunted the fleeing freighter across the Yellow Sea, closing the distance mile by mile. At 2 in the morning on July 1st, Tang maneuvered to within 750 yards. Okin fired a single torpedo from the stern tubes. The weapon struck Nikin Maru precisely amidships, snapping the ship's spine and tearing her in half. The cargo vessel vanished beneath the waves in less than 3 minutes. Over 3,000 Japanese soldiers trapped below decks went down with her, severed from any hope of escape. The catastrophe was complete, an entire regiment eliminated in seconds. The following morning, July 1st, a lookout spotted 2 ships sailing together, a tanker and a freighter. Okin maneuvered Tang into attack position and fired a spread that sent the freighter Tune Maru No. 2 to the bottom. The tanker, Takatori Maru No. 1, bolted at full throttle and fled towards safety. Tang pursued relentlessly throughout daylight hours, tracking the tanker as it twisted and turned through the water toward escape. After darkness came, Okin closed the range and fired 2 more torpedoes, both connected. The tanker detonated in a towering fireball as its aviation fuel cargo ignited in a massive explosion. The inferno blazed so intensely that flames were visible 20 miles away. Tang observed Independence Day, July the 4th, with a dawn assault on a freighter hugging the shallow coastal waters. Okin brought Tang in submerged, but the water grew so shallow that the submarine's hull scraped hard against the bottom. As the seafloor rose dangerously closer, threatening to strand Tang completely, Okin backed away, firing a spread of 3 torpedoes with 2 finding their marks. Tang then surfaced as the 6,886-ton cargo ship Asukaze Maru began her final descent. Fishing boats hurried out to snatch survivors from the water while Tang retreated to deeper safety. Through the next 2 days, Tang sent 2 more cargo ships down off Daejeon, raising her 3rd patrol's total to 10 confirmed kills. Japanese records would later verify each and every sinking. 10 separate attacks yielded 10 sunk vessels and 39,161 tons of enemy shipping sent to the ocean floor. No American submarine had achieved anything remotely like this in a single patrol throughout the entire war. Tang steamed into Pearl Harbor on July 14th, her torpedo magazines completely empty and the record books permanently altered. Navy brass credited Okin and his team with proving what aggressive, skillful submarine warfare could accomplish. Tang had operated in intensely defended waters, penetrated multiple layers of convoy escort, and destroyed ships with a frequency that sent shivers through every Japanese merchant captain. Survivors who escaped Tang's strikes reported a phantom submarine that materialized without warning, obliterated multiple vessels, then vanished before any escort could mount an effective response. Japanese naval commanders, studying their mounting shipping losses, recognized the Yellow Sea had become a graveyard, but lacked the ships and aircraft to defend convoys adequately in those waters. Tang's 4th War Patrol, running from July 31st through September 3rd, 1944, sent her into the most treacherous hunting grounds in the entire Pacific, the waters off Honshu near Tokyo itself. Okin had volunteered for this assignment despite full knowledge that Japanese home waters bristled with aircraft, surface patrols, and sophisticated shore-based radar systems. The danger was immense, yet the rewards could be equally vast. Shipping routes converged in the vicinity of Tokyo Bay, funneling targets directly into Tang's operational zone. On August 10th, Tang attacked a tanker off Omiyazaki, but all torpedoes missed when the target made unexpected evasive maneuvers. The following day, Tang encountered 2 freighters accompanied by 2 escort vessels. Okin launched 3 torpedoes at the larger freighter and 2 at the smaller one. The bigger ship simply disintegrated, apparently struck directly in the boiler room by a torpedo that triggered a chain reaction explosion. As Tang went deep, the crew felt impacts shake the hull as the fourth and fifth weapons struck the second freighter. A vicious depth charge barrage lasted 38 agonizing minutes, but Tang withstood the punishment, suffering only minor damage to internal systems. On August 14th, Tang surfaced and engaged a patrol yacht using her 4-inch 50-caliber deck gun, systematically destroying the vessel's superstructure with 8 perfectly placed rounds. 8 days later, she destroyed a 225-foot patrol boat combining gunfire and torpedoes. This fourth patrol demonstrated Okin's complete tactical mastery. When torpedoes weren't suitable, he employed the deck gun effectively. When enemy escorts outnumbered profitable targets, he waited patiently for isolated vessels. When Japanese aircraft forced him under, he simply surfaced after dark and recommenced hunting. The patrol added 6 more ships to Tang's account, though 3 were small military patrol craft rather than proper cargo vessels. By September 1944, Tang had completed 4 consecutive war patrols in 9 months of combat operations. Official records credited her with sinking 31 ships totaling 227,800 tons, though post-war analysis would eventually revise these figures downward to 33 vessels totaling 116,454 tons. Either number placed Tang unquestionably first among all American submarines in both ships sunk and total tonnage destroyed. Okin stood as the highest-scoring submarine commander in American naval history. His crew represented the most decorated and experienced submarine team operating anywhere in the Pacific Fleet. Tang departed Pearl Harbor on September 24, 1944, bound for her 5th and final war patrol. Okin specifically requested assignment to the Four-Moster Strait, those narrow waters separating Taiwan from mainland China. Few patrol areas in the Pacific proved more treacherous. Heavily mined, intensively patrolled, and absolutely critical to Japanese logistics operations. Commander John Coy, coordinating a multi-submarine assault group including Trigger and Salmon, offered Okin the opportunity to join the organized wolf pack. Okin respectfully declined. Tang would hunt alone. Following refueling at Midway Island on September 27th, Tang set course for the Four-Moster Strait. No further messages reached any American base after Tang departed Midway. Her final actions would later be reconstructed from Okin's incomplete patrol report and accounts from Japanese survivors. During the night of October 10th to 11, Tang attacked a Japanese convoy and sank 2 cargo ships, Joshua Go and Oitamaru. Hunting continued until October 23rd, when radar contact revealed a substantial convoy, 3 tankers, a transport vessel, a freighter, and numerous escorts screening the formation. Okin planned a surface attack under cover of darkness, one of his favored tactics. Tang's dark hull and minimal silhouette made her nearly impossible to detect in blackness. Her radar provided vision that Japanese sailors couldn't match. At midnight, Tang penetrated directly into the convoy's formation. Okin commenced firing torpedoes as he closed on the tankers. 2 weapons struck the nearest ship beneath the stack and engine room. 1 torpedo caught the stern of the middle tanker. 2 more explosions blossomed under the stack and engine spaces of the farthest tanker. Detonations began erupting before the final torpedo even left the tube. All found their marks. The targets quickly became infernos or sinking hulks. As Tang maneuvered toward another tanker crossing her stern, a lookout screamed a warning. The transport was charging directly at them, attempting to ram. Okin commanded full emergency speed and wheeled Tang between the burning tanker and the charging transport. The 2 Japanese ships collided catastrophically with each other in the chaos. Tang fired 4 stern torpedoes while escaping, sinking both vessels in the collision. Complete bedlam erupted. Ships burned across the horizon. Escorts randomly launched depth charges into the darkness. The convoy lost all organization and structure in minutes. Tang had shattered the formation completely. The submarine resumed patrol near Turnabout Island. On October 24th, approximately at 9 in the evening, radar revealed another large convoy approaching. As searchlights cut through the darkness and escort vessels swept the area, Tang selected her targets carefully. Okin unleashed a succession of torpedoes. A destroyer moving to counterattack suddenly exploded. Whether from Tang's weapons or friendly fire in the confusion remained unclear. A transport and tanker went under as well. Later, Japanese records would confirm the sinking of Kogen Maru and Matsumoto Maru, together displacing more than 13,000 tons. By 2:30 on the morning of October 25th, Tang had expended 23 of her total 24 torpedoes. Okin possessed a single weapon remaining, one final chance to crown the most extraordinary patrol any American submarine had ever conducted. Tang had been attacking without pause for 2 consecutive nights. She had endured repeated depth charge assaults and had destroyed 13 enemy ships. The crew was utterly spent, yet simultaneously energized by success. One more shot meant they could finally turn toward home and claim their victory. Okin spotted one final target, a cargo ship attempting to slip away through the devastation. Tang maneuvered carefully into position. At 2:30, Okin gave the command to fire the 24th and final torpedo, a Mark 18 electric weapon. The torpedo ejected cleanly from the tube and entered the water smoothly. Then catastrophe struck. The torpedo broached violently, erupting through the surface in an explosion of white spray. Instead of running straight toward the target, it curved sharply left in a tight arc. The crew watched helplessly as the torpedo began a circular run, bending back toward Tang herself. Okin ordered flank speed, desperately attempting to maneuver Tang away from the weapon's turning circle. 20 seconds elapsed as the submarine surged ahead, screws thrashing the ocean. The torpedo continued its arc, homing on the noise of Tang's engines. 20 seconds after firing, the torpedo struck Tang on the starboard side near the after torpedo compartment, approximately 20 feet from the tube it had exited. The explosion was apocalyptic. The warhead contained 575 pounds of Torpex explosive, far more destructive than simple TNT. The blast severed the submarine's stern section completely. Catastrophic flooding swept through 3 compartments instantly. The concussion threw men forward as far as the control room, shattering bones and tearing tissue. Tang's stern section sank immediately, pulling the rest of the hull downward with tremendous force. 9 officers and sailors standing on the bridge when the torpedo detonated were thrown violently about. Okin tumbled clear of the explosion and found himself in the cold water. Boatswain's mate First Class William Liebold and radio man First Class Floyd Cavalli also surfaced. One officer somehow escaped from the waterlogged conning tower without using the emergency escape hatch, a feat most experts considered virtually impossible. Lieutenant Commander Lawrence Savardkin, the engineering officer, mysteriously swam clear despite overwhelming odds. Tang settled onto the bottom at 180 feet depth. Inside the forward torpedo compartment, 30 men crammed together in the confined space, determined to escape using the forward access trunk. They had all trained extensively with the Momsen lung, a breathing apparatus specifically designed for submarine emergency escapes. Throughout the entire history of submarine warfare, the Momsen lung had never once been successfully employed to evacuate survivors from a sunken submarine during actual combat. Tang's crew now faced attempting what everyone believed was fundamentally impossible. The escape trunk could only accommodate 8 men per cycle. At 180 feet, water pressure created almost unbearable crushing force. Those attempting escape had to flood the trunk compartment, equalize pressure with the surrounding ocean, force the outer hatch open, and ascend at a controlled rate while breathing through the Momsen lung. Rising too quickly meant the bends, nitrogen bubbles expanding in blood and tissue, causing paralysis or instant death. Any panic would prove fatal. Only rigid discipline meant survival. 13 men began the escape attempt. 8 either drowned inside the trunk or during the agonizing ascent. 5 managed to reach the surface alive. Petterman 3rd Class Pete Naro Ansky, Petterman 2nd Class Hayes Trucker, Motor Machinist's Mate 2nd Class Jesse De Silva, Motor Machinist's Mate 3rd Class Clayton Decker, and Lieutenant Junior Grade Henry Flanagan clawed their way to the surface and fought through 8 grueling hours in the cold water before being rescued. At dawn, a Japanese destroyer escort vessel recovered the 9 survivors from the water. That same destroyer also carried severely burned and wounded men, survivors from the ships Tang had obliterated just hours before. The moment those survivors pulled Tang's crew from the water, something shifted. The American submarineers faced beatings and torture at the hands of men who had watched their ships burn. Yet Okene would later capture this moment with striking compassion. When his crew understood that the men administering the clubbing and kicking were the burned, mutilated survivors of their own attacks, they found they could endure it with a different kind of resolve. The fury they faced came not from cruelty alone, but from desperation and loss. 9 men survived that day. Okan, Leibold, Cavoli, Savudkin, Naro-Ansky, Trucker, De Silva, Decker and Flanagan were transported across the Pacific to Japan and locked away. First came the Okane Navy Detention Center, its concrete walls and sparse cells offering no mercy. Then they were moved to the Omori prisoner of war camp, where conditions remained brutal and unforgiving. Somehow, against the odds, they endured. 78 souls did not share that fate. They remained aboard Tang when she sank into the Formosa Strait, resting now in waters claimed by China. The submarine that had dominated these waters, that had struck with such devastating precision, now lay silent on the bottom. Her steel hull still held the men who died in her compartments, unable to escape before the water rushed in. Tang was destroyed by her own weapon, the final torpedo fired on the most triumphant patrol ever executed by an American submarine. It was a tragedy wrapped in bitter irony. But what Tang accomplished before that final moment was staggering. On her last patrol alone, she sank 13 vessels totaling 17,024 tons of shipping. Across 5 patrols spanning 9 months, she sent 33 confirmed ships to the ocean floor, ships carrying 116,454 tons of cargo, troops and supplies. No other American submarine achieved anything close to this record in such a compressed time frame. When August 1945 arrived and the war finally ended, the 9 survivors walked out of their prison camps as free men. They returned to the United States carrying memories of captivity and loss. Okane's courage and leadership during those final attacks had not gone unnoticed. The Navy nominated him immediately for the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. On a spring day at the White House, March 27, 1946, President Harry Truman placed that medal around his neck while the nation watched. The citation recognized his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity during Tang's final 2 attacks on October 23 and 24, 1944. But it represented more than those 2 days. It honored 5 patrols of relentless, aggressive combat. It acknowledged tactical innovations that had transformed submarine warfare. It recognized the discipline and training of a crew operating at absolute peak performance. Okane received 3 Navy Crosses as well, 3 Silver Stars, and the Legion of Merit with Combat Valor. These were not the decorations of a man lucky enough to survive, they were the medals of a warrior who had proven his exceptional skill. Okane remained in uniform long after the war ended. He commanded submarine tenders, testified at trials documenting Japanese war crimes, and eventually rose to lead Submarine Division 32. His career trajectory demonstrated that surviving Tang's loss had not diminished him. In 1957, he retired as a rear admiral, having served the Navy for 13 additional years. When he passed away on February 16, 1994, at age 82, he carried with him the distinction of being the highest-scoring submarine commander in American naval history. Tang herself received 4 battle stars and 2 Presidential Unit citations for her World War II service. On February 8, 1945, she was officially struck from the Naval Register, her loss formally recorded. 40 years after the war ended, in 1985, the surviving crew members gathered for a reunion. 5 of the 9 men who had endured captivity together came together one final time to remember. They spoke of the 78 shipmates who had remained aboard, of the men who died in the after compartments when the torpedo struck, unable to reach an escape hatch before the compartments flooded. They remembered those who died attempting to escape from the forward torpedo room, succumbing to the crushing pressure, drowning in the dark water, or suffering the bends during their desperate ascent to the surface. The Japanese Navy's response to submarines like Tang revealed profound weaknesses in their strategic thinking. Japan was an island nation utterly dependent on shipping, just as Britain had been. Any rational assessment should have devoted massive resources to protecting merchant convoys. Instead, the Imperial Japanese Navy remained fixated on offensive operations and battleship engagements. They ignored the convoy threat until far too late. The Grand Escort Command, Japan's belated attempt to organize convoy protection, wasn't established until November 1943, more than 2 years into the war. Even then, it received obsolete vessels, inadequately trained personnel, and insufficient resources. By 1944, American submarines were destroying Japanese merchant ships at a rate of approximately 250,000 gross tons every month. That year alone saw nearly 600 Japanese merchant ships, totaling 2.7 million tons, sent to the bottom by American submarines. Japanese commodity imports collapsed from 16.4 million tons down to just 10 million tons. The Strategic Bombing Survey conducted after the war concluded that the war against shipping was perhaps the single most decisive factor in the collapse of Japan's economy and the collapse of logistics support for the Japanese military and navy. Tang's record was part of this broader submarine campaign that slowly strangled Japan's ability to continue the war. Of the 4 million tons of Japanese merchant shipping lost during the entire war, American submarines accounted for 56% of it. Beyond merchant vessels, American submarines sank 211 Japanese warships, including 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, and 11 cruisers. This extraordinary achievement was accomplished by a submarine force that never exceeded 50,000 officers and enlisted men combined, with only 16,000 of those serving at sea. The submarine service represented just 1.6% of the entire United States Navy, yet inflicted damage wholly disproportionate to its size. A tiny force achieved results that altered the course of the war. The parallels between Tang's individual success and the broader submarine campaign were striking. Both demonstrated that technological superiority, aggressive tactics, and skilled personnel could produce devastating results. The Mark 18 electric torpedo that ultimately destroyed Tang was the same revolutionary weapon that made her attack so lethal against enemy shipping. American submarines by 1944 possessed working torpedoes, effective radar, reliable sonar, and commanders trained in aggressive tactics. Japanese anti-submarine forces lacked equivalent technology and doctrine. The result was systematic slaughter. Tang's third patrol had proven what was possible. 10 ships destroyed in just 36 days demonstrated what American submarines could achieve when everything functioned correctly. The fifth patrol, sinking 13 ships before being destroyed by a malfunctioning weapon, revealed both the heights of success and the cruel randomness of combat. Okane and his crew had pushed submarine warfare to its absolute limits, achieving results that seemed impossible when the war began. They had redefined what a single submarine and its crew could accomplish. Post-war analysis confirmed what the numbers suggested. Tang's confirmed total of 33 ships sank placed her first on the list of most successful American submarines for both number of vessels destroyed and total tonnage. USS Tautog received credit for 26 ships but lower tonnage. USS Flasher achieved higher tonnage but fewer ships. Tang held both records simultaneously. No other submarine came close. Okane's personal total of 33 ships across 5 patrols gave him the highest count of any submarine commander in American service. His average of 1 ship sunk for every 10 days on patrol remained unmatched before or after. The story of Tang is fundamentally a story of exceptional men performing exceptional feats under extraordinary pressure. Okane's tactical innovations, his crew's rigorous training and discipline, their aggressive execution of every attack, and their courage during depth-charge assaults all combined to create the most successful submarine in American naval history. The tragic ending, destroyed by their own weapon at the moment of greatest triumph, adds a dimension of cruel irony that cannot be forgotten. Tang's crew knew they were the finest. They trained harder, fought more aggressively, and took greater risks than almost any other submarine crew in the Navy. They paid the ultimate price when 78 men perished in the sinking. But in 9 months of combat, they achieved what would take other submarines years to accomplish. They proved that submarine warfare, when conducted with skill and audacity, could inflict strategic damage far exceeding a submarine's physical size or cost. The Japanese merchant marine never recovered from the devastation inflicted by submarines like Tang. By 1945, Japan's shipping lanes had become graveyards. Merchant captains refused to sail without massive escorts. Convoy routes were abandoned as too dangerous. Critical raw materials remained in conquered territories because no ships existed to transport them home. Japan's war economy collapsed not from bombing raids but from strangulation, the slow suffocation of supply lines by submarines operating thousands of miles from American bases. Tang's legacy extended beyond mere combat statistics. She proved that American submarine design was superior, that American torpedo technology had finally achieved reliability, and that American commanders could execute complex attacks with devastating precision. The Gato-class submarines, of which Tang was one, became the template for post-war American submarine development. The tactics Okin pioneered, night surface attacks and aggressive convoy penetration, became doctrine taught at submarine school for generations. His emphasis on crew training and constant periscope drills became standard practice across the entire submarine service. In 1963, the Navy commissioned a new submarine, USS Tang SS-563, named in honor of the World War II boat. This Tang served until 1980, carrying the name and legacy of Okane's command into the nuclear age. Today, the guided missile destroyer USS Okane, DDG-77, continues that tradition, named for the Medal of Honor recipient who demonstrated what courage, skill, and determination could accomplish. The submarine warfare campaign in the Pacific remains one of the least publicized yet most decisive operations of World War II. Unlike dramatic carrier battles or amphibious invasions that captured headlines, submarine operations occurred in silence and secrecy. Boats departed on patrol and either returned or simply didn't. Successes were classified, losses were mourned quietly, and the strategic impact remained poorly understood until after the war ended. Yet the numbers revealed the true story. American submarines destroyed over half of Japan's merchant fleet and significant portions of her navy, accomplishing this with a tiny fraction of overall naval personnel. Tang's story within this larger campaign stands out for concentrating so much success into such a brief period. 9 months, 5 patrols, 33 ships destroyed, 78 men lost, 9 survivors, 1 Medal of Honor. The mathematics are brutal and extraordinary in equal measure. Tang compressed into 9 months what most submarines required years to achieve, and paid for that success with the highest casualty rate among successful American submarines. The circular run that destroyed her was not unique in submarine history. USS Tullabee had been sunk by her own torpedo on March 26, 1940, becoming the first American submarine lost to this cause. Other submarines experienced circular runs but managed to escape destruction. The Mark 18 electric torpedo, despite being superior to earlier weapons, still suffered occasional guidance failures. The gyroscope controlling direction could malfunction. The propeller could be damaged during launch. External factors like ocean currents could affect trajectory. At the moment Okane launched his 24th torpedo, all the skill and courage in the world could not overcome a mechanical failure that sent the weapon back toward its source. That 9 men survived at all was miraculous. 5 men escaped from inside the sunken submarine using nothing but their lungs, accomplishing what submarine training manuals considered nearly impossible. 4 men, including Okane, survived in the water for 8 hours after being thrown from the bridge or escaping the conning tower, demonstrating extraordinary endurance in conditions that should have killed them. All 9 endured brutal treatment from Japanese survivors and 10 months of imprisonment, showing resilience that matched their combat courage. Okane's post-war career, rising to Rear Admiral and serving the Navy for 13 additional years, proved that surviving Tang's loss had not diminished his capability or determination. The reunions held by Tang survivors became deeply emotional gatherings where 9 men remembered 78 shipmates. They spoke of the men who died in the after compartments when the torpedo struck. unable to escape before those spaces flooded completely. They remembered the men who died attempting escape from the forward torpedo room, succumbing to pressure, drowning, or the bends during their ascent to the surface. They honored the men who had carried Tang through 5 patrols, achieving the impossible and paying the ultimate price. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans created an interactive exhibit called Final Mission that allows visitors to experience Tang's last patrol firsthand. Participants enter a simulated submarine, receive cards corresponding to actual crew members, and are assigned stations throughout the boat. The events of October 24th and 25th, 1944, unfold on overhead screens while visitors perform their assigned tasks. The circular run of the 24th torpedo is depicted in vivid detail. Upon exiting, visitors see a wall with photographs of the crew and learn whether the sailor associated with their card survived. It's a powerful reminder that behind the statistics and tactics were real men who faced death in the dark depths. Tang's combat record remains unmatched even today. 33 ships confirmed sunk across 5 patrols. The 3rd patrol brought 10 ships in just 36 days. The 5th patrol claimed 13 ships before the submarine's destruction. Overall average, 1 ship every 10 days on patrol. These numbers represent far more than pure destruction. They represent disruption of Japan's entire war effort. Each ship carried troops, equipment, raw materials, or food. Each sinking meant Japanese soldiers without ammunition, factories without raw materials, civilians without food. Multiply Tang's success by the hundreds of American submarines conducting similar patrols throughout the Pacific, and the strategic impact becomes undeniable. Japan was strangled by submarines operating in silent isolation across an ocean. The loss of Tang by her own torpedo adds tragic irony to this achievement. After sinking more ships than any other American submarine, after conducting the most successful patrol in submarine warfare history, after demonstrating what skilled submariners could accomplish, Tang was destroyed by the very weapon that made her so deadly. The crew's final moment was not defeat in combat, but rather the victim of mechanical failure, a random malfunction at the worst possible moment. Okane's Medal of Honor citation emphasized his actions during the final 2 attacks, but the award really honored 5 patrols of sustained aggressive combat. It recognized tactical innovations that changed submarine warfare forever. It acknowledged crew training that produced the most effective submarine team in the entire Pacific. It memorialized 78 men who died when Tang went down, and it celebrated survival, the 9 men who lived through what should have killed them all. The Japanese convoy survivors who beat Tang's crew after rescue demonstrated precisely how effective the submarine had been. Their fury came from watching ships destroyed, comrades killed, and the apparent invincibility of an enemy who appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating effect, and vanished into the depths. That American submariners could inflict such damage and then survive their own submarine's sinking must have seemed incomprehensible to men who had watched Tang operate with seeming immunity throughout the attacks. Tang's final resting place in the Formosa Strait remains undisturbed. Chinese territorial waters prevent exploration or salvage operations. The submarine lies in 180 feet of water, her stern section separated from the rest of the hull by the torpedo explosion. Her forward compartments contain the remains of men who died attempting escape. It is a war grave, protected by international convention and practical inaccessibility. Tang's crew remains aboard their submarine, forever on patrol in the waters where they achieved their greatest success and met their tragic end. The submarine service erected no grand monuments to Tang. There are no massive memorials listing the 33 ships destroyed or celebrating the tonnage sent to the bottom. The story is preserved in official records, Okane's books about Wahoo and Tang, survivor accounts, and the memories of families who lost fathers, brothers, and sons. The Navy honored Tang by naming 2 subsequent vessels after her, ensuring the name continues in active service. That is the submarine's memorial, not stone and bronze, but steel and purpose, carrying the legacy forward through continued service and dedication to duty. Tang's story demonstrates that in war, success and tragedy often intertwine in ways that defy simple explanation. The most successful submarine met the most ironic fate. The highest-scoring commander survived to receive the Medal of Honor, while 78 of his crew perished. The submarine that revolutionized tactics was destroyed by the weapon that made those tactics possible. These contradictions cannot be resolved, only acknowledged as part of war's cruel randomness and unpredictability. What Tang proved beyond any doubt was that American submarines in 1944 had evolved into strategic weapons capable of decisive impact on a nation's entire war effort. The boats were reliable, the torpedoes worked, the tactics were proven, and the commanders were aggressive in their pursuit of the enemy. Tang concentrated all these factors into 9 months of nearly flawless execution, marked only by the mechanical failure that ended her operational career. In those 9 months, she sank enough shipping to affect Japan's entire war economy, destroyed enough enemy vessels to create panic within the merchant marine, and demonstrated enough tactical skill to change submarine warfare doctrine forever. The crew of USS Tang, both the 78 who died and the 9 who survived, achieved something genuinely extraordinary. They took a submarine and crew to the absolute limits of performance, maintaining that level through 5 consecutive patrols and producing results that remain unmatched 7 decades later. Their legacy is not merely numbers and tactics, but rather proof of what exceptional men can accomplish when training, technology, and courage combine in pursuit of a clear objective. They were the finest submarine crew of World War II, and Tang was the finest submarine. That their story ends in tragedy does not diminish their achievement. It adds a final chapter that reminds us that even the best sometimes fall victim to the randomness and cruelty inherent in war.